All right, stand by. 10 seconds to
camera,
go.
Talent,
Ready,
roll
camera.
for
And
record.
cue talent.
2,
One.
1, roll for record.
Controversies exploding over Middle Eastern refugees as new details surface about the Paris attackers. Are we inviting the enemy in? I'm John Phillips, and this is The Rundown. Immediately after the horrific attacks in Paris, there were reports that a Syrian passport was found on the body on one of the terrorists. But we were told not to jump to conclusions. It's probably a forgery intended to sow fear over the massive tide of Muslim refugees flooding the West. Those concerned were called calloused, racist, Islamophobic, and worse. Just read Stephen Cruiser's Twitter feed. But investigations by the BBC, the Associated Press, and other agencies have found that at least 2 and probably 3 of the men who participated in the slaughter of innocents in Paris entered Europe through Greece as Syrian refugees. One has been identified as Ahmed al-Mohammed, and the other has been identified only by his first initial, M, and his last name, al-Mahmoud. Both were suicide bombers who blew themselves up outside Paris's Stade de France stadium. The fingerprints taken from fragments of their bodies match the fingerprints taken when they entered Europe through Greece. Seems legit to me. In fact, the terrorists were even rescued from a sinking raft by the Greek Coast Guard, then clothed and fed by a French relief agency before making their way to Paris to, of course, kill Parisians. Germany's Der Spiegel also reports that according to their own sources, a third attacker traveled into Europe with refugees as well. And Greek officials are saying it's nearly impossible to find jihadists among the refugees. Syria is in ruins, and their identities simply can't be confirmed. President Obama remains determined to vastly increase the number of Middle Eastern refugees allowed into the United States and promises extensive thorough vetting of each refugee allowed in. But the House of Representatives and a majority of the nation's governors have said no way, and the ACLU is currently in the process of suing Indiana's Mike Pence to force that state to take refugees, whether they like it or not. Adding to the confusion is the fact that Syrian refugees are starting to show up crossing the border from Mexico. 5, count them 5, Syrians presented themselves as seeking asylum at the Laredo, Texas station last week, and 8 Syrians showed up the week before. Another 3 were caught traveling on fake passports on the Caribbean island of St. Martin, and another in Honduras were all headed our way. Should we roll out the welcome mat for refugees as the president wants, or is that a desperate attempt, or is that an attempt to invite a desperate population of Muslim refugees ripe for radicalization, just asking for more domestic terror attacks like the Boston Marathon bombing? To explore this question and much, much more, we turn to PJTV contributor and author Scott Ott from his home studio in Dallas, Texas, and here in Southern California, stand-up comic and PJTV contributor Stephen Cruiser. You know, Cruiser, it wasn't that long ago that we debated importing these Syrian refugees into the United States. And I took the position that we shouldn't do it, despite the humanitarian crisis, because there wasn't a way to vet them. There wasn't a way to figure out who's a member of ISIS and who isn't. It looks like that was absolutely true when it comes to these Paris attackers.
Yeah, and there's, you know, I liken it to being a parent. There are these times where, you know, you want to do something that makes your heart tug in one direction, but you would end up being more like the friend to your child or something. And so you need to be the adult. You need to be the parent. Somebody needs to be the adult here right now. And it's as awful as it is to try to paint it with a broad brush and say, okay, well, you know, we can't trust any of them. It's even worse for the people in power right now to completely deny the fact that ISIS or any other terrorist groups may be co-opting this tragedy to, you know, to further their gains. It's really naive to take that approach right now. And the people in charge are in the United States are like that right now. Their rhetoric is that, oh, this, that, and the other, and you can't trust them to have a serious vetting process for this, even if it were possible. Now, you're saying it's not possible at all. Even if it were possible, you can't trust them to have a serious vetting process because they're not serious people who take this problem seriously.
You know, Scott, if you listen to the president and his supporters, I'm essentially an anti-Islamic rube for not wanting to take these people in. I'm cold-hearted. You can fill in all the rest of the pejoratives that they have for me. But you know what? I take the same position on these people, on these refugees, that the Saudi Arabian government takes, that the Kuwaiti government takes. Are they anti-Islamic too?
No, you see, this whole thing is set up. It's a false argument to say, look, if you care about national security, you must hate refugees. You can do both. You can say, I love refugees and I want to provide a safe sanctuary for them. At the same time, I care about national security. It is compassionate to want to get people who are in harm's way out of harm's way. It is also compassionate to not want bombs to blow up in Boston. I think that that's the height of compassion. And when you're in a situation like this, why is it that they have to come across the Atlantic Ocean? Why do we not have allies who apparently the Arab world loves President Obama? Where is the Arab world country that says, I'll tell you what, we'll set aside a few square miles of land here to provide a refuge for these people, to get them out of harm's way without yanking them completely out of their culture, without shipping them across the ocean from which they will never return? Let's keep them in the area until we're able to solve the Syrian and Iraqi problem, the ISIS problem, and then allow them to return to their homes. Isn't that compassionate?
You know, here's what we know about homeless people. When people live on the streets because they have drug addictions or alcohol addictions or they're paranoid schizophrenics or whatever issue is plaguing them and ruining their lives, a lot of municipalities will take these people and put them on buses and send them to California because we're so liberal about dealing with the homeless, which is one of the worst things that you can do to someone, because you need them around their family, around their friends. If they have any chance at all at getting better, they need some kind of support system. And if you send them to a state they may have never visited before or certainly don't know anyone in, then they're really abandoned by wolves. If you're talking about these refugees and you really truly do want to help them, then allowing them to stay where they theoretically have a support system, where there's cultures that they're familiar with, where there's people that they know, that's a much better situation for that individual than it is to ship them across the globe to a different first world country where they're going to entertain a whole host of problems.
This is a lot like the false compassion argument that a lot of people have about illegal immigration from Mexico here, where they make it seem like just letting them flow freely from the south to the north here makes their lives immeasurably better overnight. And in reality, a lot of them are getting shipped over in trucks where they risk death. They get here and they're living in squalor with 20 people in a small room, and it's not really that much better, but they're getting a little bit of money to send back to Mexico. So no, it's just the mere act doesn't mean you're making their lives better. You're right. It's not a good thing. It's not there. It's, as you and Scott are making a very good point here, where there's already somewhat of a structure in place over there, and to throw this new wild card into the mix, hey, let's get them on planes or boats and bring them all the way over here, and then we got room. What are you going to do with the room? I don't know. We're going to put them there. What are you going to do when you put them? Yeah, who knows? So we're going to say, it's just, there's really no plan here. This is just, they're throwing stuff against the wall to see what sticks. And that's when you're dealing with potential terrorist attacks, it's not just nonsensical, it's frightening to think that that's their approach right now.
You know, Scott, the president says we have a foolproof vetting process to make sure that none of these Syrians are going to come over here and try to do damage. None of them have ties to Al-Qaeda or ISIS or any other terrorist organizations in the Middle East. My response to that is, if we have this superior technology to figure out who's a terrorist and who isn't, why are we sharing it with Greece? Why aren't we sharing it with our allies in Europe? Why aren't we protecting them from these terrorists? Why are we keeping it to ourselves? The answer, in my opinion, is because he's lying, we don't have it, and he's just rolling the dice.
Well, yeah, and I have three words for President Obama: Dzhokhar and Tamerlan Tsarnaev. I mean, that's, if our system is so foolproof, then why did people die at the Boston Marathon? And by the way, the government of Greece says they have a foolproof plan too. And they're denying that anybody could possibly have slipped through their incredible dragnet that never lets anybody through. Listen, as President Bush used to say, and as many people understand, the terrorists only have to be right once. They only have to be right once. And so, 650,000 Muslim refugees have flooded into Greece in 2015 alone. If 1, 2, 3, 8 of those are terrorists and manage to slip that impenetrable gauntlet and get into Europe or the United States of America, they wreak havoc. They rain down hell upon us. There is no reason in the world that a compassionate person can't say, let's build something in Qatar, in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates, in Saudi Arabia, somewhere in that territory. The American people are so compassionate. Not only will we set up a clean and healthful camp there with health care and food and clean water, we'll build them a frickin' Disneyland in the desert to take care of them.
Well, I don't know about that, because if it's Disneyland, then we take all their money, because it's, what, $45 for a corn dog?
$100 to get in. Disneyland is a dream now. It's just a dream. This is another. This brings up another point that both of you have mentioned here already too, about how unwilling American administrations, Republican or Democrat, are to ever demand anything of the Saudis. Ever. We won't push them on anything. We just like have this weird relationship, let them get away with whatever, and we never lean on them for anything.
The polls show the American public does not want these refugees in the United States.
Overwhelmingly.
Okay. We have at least one Democratic governor, the governor of New Hampshire, that said, I don't want them in my state.
Yes.
You had a number of Democrats who broke with the party and voted with Republicans when the House of Representatives voted to not allow these people in. Will the Democrats pay a political price for getting so enthusiastically behind allowing these refugees in the country at a time when the public just doesn't want them?
I think they will. I think this is, the polls last week were 54%, 56%, and then the media spun it all as it's breaking down along party lines. I went, oh, well, then there are a lot of Republicans in America right now. Okay, if it's 56%, we're doing much better than I thought we were. So it's obviously not just Republicans out there. There's the theory that a lot of people might be identifying more as Republicans now that the national security issues are coming up too. So I think there is a toll to pay at this. We always wonder whether foreign policy and national security will come to the fore in a presidential election. It's hard to make that happen when nothing. This is the sad thing. It's kind of like finding what needs to be fixed on an airplane, but not finding out until after it crashes. It's hard to make that happen when nothing is happening. Now that something's happening, I think it is coming to the fore in a presidential election, which doesn't happen often, but it's already helping some Republican candidates, and I don't see how it helps the Democrats getting so far behind on this.
Scott, this may surprise you, but I think Chris Matthews on MSNBC had one of the best questions in regard to the refugee issue with the governor of Delaware. The governor of Delaware is one of these governors who's saying, I welcome these refugees in. This is part of the American character, taking care of people when they're dealing with atrocious incidents going on in their country abroad. And Chris Matthews said, if one of these refugees ends up killing a bunch of your residents, is there blood on your hands? And the guy started to dodge the issue, and Matthews held his feet to the fire. So let me ask the same question to you, Scott. If one of these refugees turns out to be a member of Al-Qaeda or a member of ISIS, as appears to be the case in Paris, is there blood on the hands of President Obama?
Yeah, well, and I think any of these people, these politicians who stand up for this, let's put the first 500 refugee tents in a sealed compound on the property of a house we call the White House. Let's put the next 100 people on the gubernatorial mansion grounds of the governor of Delaware. And let's take these people, say, hey, if you're serious about this, I'll tell you what, the government can provide some of the best housing possible. We got a lot of government buildings that have empty space in them, especially at night, nice places to sleep. You're going to welcome them first, live with them for 6 months or so, completely, do your absolutely thorough screening process and have them live there. Again, it's a false dichotomy. They are forcing us into this question that says, just like you said earlier, John, if you don't welcome these people from 3,000 miles away onto our sovereign land, then you hate Muslims. And that's baloney. You can love Muslims and say, I want to provide a place for them to live close to their home until the conflict blows over, and then they can move back. Because, frankly, the vast majority of Syrians love Syria, and they want to live in Syria, and let them return to Syria.
There's being compassionate and there's being suicidal. And the West, Europe in particular, is just, to me, entirely suicidal. That's just Jonestown. The fact that so many Americans are suicidal about this issue is really frightening to me.
Our short memories are not serving us well at all here. I mean, you know, it's like you need something bad to happen every week for Americans to stay on point when it comes to national security and war, which is really ridiculous, which is awful. I mean, people say, well, you know, September 11th happened so long ago. Not really. It didn't really happen that long ago. I mean, we're still, you know, we can still remember Pearl Harbor Day every year, lo, these many decades later, but it's somehow the 21st century stuff gets just, oh, well, that was September 11th. That was a long time ago. That's not real. So it's the short attention span here that's really ridiculous. And American liberals have the luxury of being like this. This is what their entire lives are, sitting there advocating policies that never actually touch them personally. That's what they do. It's Teddy Kennedy and the damn windmills in Cape Cod. You know, I love this kind of energy, but don't put it where it's blocking my view. That's the same thing over and over again. So as long as these people are going somewhere where the Democratic governor of Delaware and everybody else doesn't have to touch it, it's the same thing Democrats always do.
Here's the challenge I would put out to all these leftists that want to take in Syrian refugees. For every pro-lifer that adopts an unwanted child, I think a liberal should have to adopt a Syrian refugee.
I like the plan.
A one-for-one comparison. That's all I'm asking.
And give them a tent. Give the family a tent. They can, you know, build on the property if they want.
All right, that's all the time we have for today. But now it's your turn. Should the U.S. provide asylum to Middle Eastern refugees, or is the danger simply too great? Tell us what you think in the comments section below. I'm John Phillips. Thanks so much for watching The Rundown.